Hey there, boys and girls. Mr. Potman here, bringing you topic 3.3, the circulatory system. So this is the third system that we've talked about. We've already gone over digestive system and respiratory system. Today we're going to learn about the different parts of the circulatory system, the function of the circulatory system, and particularly we're going to compare discuss how the circulatory system works in conjunction with the respiratory and the digestive system. So here we go. So the circulatory system, we're going to start off with a pretty picture down here that shows a whole bunch of roads and whatnot. Circulatory system is the transport system of the body. Okay, so the circulatory system is the system that gets the oxygen from the lungs to the different parts of the body, gets the nutrients from the digestive system, from the small intestines to the different parts of the body, as well as it picks up waste from different parts of the body and delivers it back to systems that help get rid of it. So a lot of students in the past have gotten this a little confused. They've thought the digestive system is what gets the nutrients to the body and the respiratory system is what gets the oxygen to the body. It's actually the circulatory system that does that. The respiratory system just gets oxygen into our body. The digestive system breaks those nutrients up into small usable parts so it can go into the circulatory system to get delivered. Okay, so like we mentioned, oxygen, nutrients, and waste are transported throughout the respiratory system. Now, there's three main parts in the respiratory system. I'm sure you can think about them right away, but we're going to go over them in detail, or a little bit of detail for each section. The first one is the heart. Then we have our blood vessels. And then lastly, we actually have our blood, which is a obviously very important part. We're going to start by talking about the heart. We've got a pretty picture of a Valentine up on the top corner. It looks like a Valentine-style heart, but it also sort of looks like a creepy, like a monster heart. The heart is essentially two big giant pumps that work side by side. Okay, one pump is used to move blood to our body. So if I need blood down on my big toe, there's a pump in my heart that pumps that blood down to my big toe. Okay, however, that blood needs to come back to the heart, and that's where the second pump comes into play, and that pump pumps blood to our lungs. So remember, respiratory system, one of the pumps pumps it to the lungs, the other pump pumps it to the rest of the body. Different sides of the heart have different roles. Okay, so the right side of the heart receives deoxygenated blood, so that's blood that has no oxygen in it from the different parts of the body. It's how we need to get rid of it. And it pumps deoxygenated blood from it goes to the body, to the heart, and then it pumps that deoxygenated blood to the lungs so that we can get rid of it. The left side of the heart receives oxygenated blood from the lungs, so it goes from the lungs to the left side of the heart, and then from there it pumps the oxygenated blood to the rest of all the different parts of our body. So your big toe if you need it. And here we have a beautiful picture of a heart, and right here I've got a heart from my mannequin. Okay, and if you actually take a look at the picture here, it has the left atrium, the right atrium, the right ventricle, and the left ventricle. We're going to talk about each of these, but if you're looking at the picture on your screen right now, you'll notice the left ventricle and the left atrium is on the left-hand side, and the right atrium and the right ventricle are on the right-hand side. The reason it's like that, the left atrium and the left ventricle are on the right-hand side, and the right atrium and right ventricle are on the left-hand side. The reason it looks like that is because when you're talking about heart, you have to picture it or imagine it how it's actually in our body. So when we're looking at it, I break my heart there. If I take a look at it, the right atrium is actually on the right-hand side when the heart is positioned correctly, as well the left atrium is on the left-hand side. Okay? So it's something important to keep in mind, even though the picture is showing left on the right and right on the left, it's because the heart would actually be flipped around. All right, let's make my picture smaller again. Talk about these. So we're going to talk about the role of each of these. So we're going to start with the atriums. Okay, so the left atrium is the upper chamber up here of the heart, and the right atrium is the upper right chamber of the heart. So these are your little atriums or atrias. Okay, the left atrium is what receives oxygenated blood from the lungs. You'll notice it's red. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's red to signify that the blood has oxygen in it. The right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the body. It's blue to signify that there's carbon dioxide or there's no oxygen in The left atrium, the blood enters through a vein. This is pretty important. And on the right atrium, the blood also enters through a vein. So keep that in the back of your mind when we start talking about veins. The blood always enters the heart through a vein, whether it's coming from our big toe or whether it's coming from the lungs, it enters through a vein. Okay, then the left atrium sends blood to the left ventricle, which is down here, and you would expect the right atrium sends blood to the right ventricle. Okay, in order to prevent the blood from going back from the ventricle into the atrium, we have valves that control the flow, and we have that on both of these. You might remember from the mix and flow of matter unit, we talked about valves, how valves control the flow. Okay, so both of these have valves to prevent the blood from going back into the atrium. We're going to be talking about valves again when we talk about blood vessels. That leads us to our ventricles. So again, the left ventricle in our diagram here, it's on the right-hand side because we're looking at the heart this way. Right? So the left ventricle is the lower left chamber of the heart, and the right ventricle is the lower right chamber of the heart. The blood comes from the left atrium, from the left ventricle. Sorry, comes into the left ventricle from the left atrium, and the same thing on the right side. Blood comes from the right atrium. It sends, and from here, the pump sends oxygen-rich blood to the body when it contracts. So when you hear that beat, it sends that blood right to the different parts of your body. It's a big pump. And then on the right-hand side, it sends that deoxygenated blood, that blood with the carbon dioxide in it, to the lungs. The blood cells need oxygen to survive, so that's why they're sending oxygen to the rest of our body. We need that oxygen. And on the same token, the blood travels to the lungs to go pick up that gas, okay, to pick up that oxygen, which we talked about in the respiratory system. And it's also delivering that carbon dioxide so we can get rid of it, okay? And here we go, blood leaves the left ventricle through an artery, and the same thing happens on the right side. The blood leaves through an artery. So it's very important to remember the blood goes to the heart through a vein, leaves the heart through an artery. There we go. That was it for the heart in a nutshell. Now we're going to talk about blood vessels, and we have 3 different types of blood vessels. There's arteries, veins, and capillaries. And we've already talked about arteries and veins, and now we have capillaries, which we have talked about capillaries in the other units. Okay, blood vessels are designed to carry and transport blood. That's their role. Okay, that's to send the blood throughout our body. Okay, and we have a lot. Remember when we were talking about the digestive system, it was only about, I think we said it was 8 meters or so. The blood vessels in our body, if we were to be able to stretch them all out, we've got over 100,000 kilometers. So there is a lot of blood vessels in our body. Most of them are very small. Blood vessels are made up of 3 of the 4 types of tissue we talked about. So remember, there was nervous tissue, epithelial tissue, connective tissue, and muscle tissue. Blood vessels are made up of the muscle tissue, the epithelial tissue, and the connective tissue, not the nervous tissue. And that's the only set of tissues that are not there. So blood vessels, we'll talk about the arteries first, okay? And as mentioned when we talked about the heart, the arteries carry blood away from the heart, okay? So every single time blood leaves the heart, whether it's going down to my big toe or whether it's going to my lung to have gas exchange, it's leaving through an artery, okay? Nice way or an easy way to remember this is artery starts with the letter A. Blood going away from the heart, the word away starts with the letter A. I remember that when I was in grade 8, and it stayed with me all these many years. Arteries are very different from veins. They have a very thick wall so that they can handle a lot of pressure. We said the heart is a big pump, right? So it's pumping that blood out of our body very quickly. In order to be able to handle the pressure of that pump, they need to have that thick wall. And here's a pretty picture of a nice clean artery up on the top right corner. These thick muscular walls expand and contract to move your blood. That's actually how we're measuring our pulse. We also have veins. Veins carry blood to the heart. So once the blood gets all the way down to my big toe, delivers that oxygen, okay, picks up that carbon dioxide. It needs to get back to my heart to get rid of the carbon dioxide. To get back to my heart, it goes in the vein. Okay, veins are not as thick as blood vessels, or as arteries, I should say. So if you take a look at the cross section of a vein here compared to an artery, you can see it's a lot thinner. Okay, and the reason it's a lot thinner is there's no actual heart pumping that blood way down into the different parts of the veins. However, to prevent the blood from going back downwards, they actually have valves that help squeeze the blood all the way up to the heart. Okay, so it prevents the blood from going downwards due to gravity or whatnot. So my big toe, I'm not that tall, but it's pretty far from my heart. Those valves allow the blood to only go in one direction. Okay, and you can see a little picture down here that shows how the muscles help the contraction. It pushes the blood this way. Okay, you can see they're contracting right here, causing the blood to open up the valve, go out that way. But then when it stops and the contraction relaxes, the valves close, so the blood doesn't go back. That leads us to our last blood vessels, and these ones are super important. These are the capillaries. Okay, and I always refer to the capillaries kind of like this. You got some over here, some over here. Sometimes I would go and I'd have my hand painted all red here, painted all blue here, or right red and blue, and I'd go and say, boom, these are our capillaries. Okay? Capillaries are tiny little blood vessels that connect arteries to veins. So here we have the arteries, the red blood, the oxygenated blood. Here we have the veins, the deoxygenated blood, and they connect. Okay, and typically when you see a picture, you see some is red, one half is red, one half is blue. Okay, capillaries are very important because this is where gas exchange and nutrients exchange occurs. Okay, and they have two very important adaptations that show that are the reason for this. Okay, the first adaptation is they have a very thin epithelial tissue, and this tissue is so thin it's only one cell layer thick. We've heard about this already. Remember from the alveoli that are in the lungs, as well as the villi that are in our small intestine. They also have an epithelial tissue that is only one cell layer thick. And both of those things are covered with tiny capillaries. Okay, so they are very thin, so only one cell layer thick, and they're also very narrow. Only one cell can go through at a time. You can't have 10, 20, 30 blood cells passing through capillary at one time. Because of these two adaptations, gas exchange, the rate of gas exchange is really quick. Because it's so thin, because they're going single file, it's kind of like cattle getting herded through a corral or whatnot. They're all going through one at a time. It's very easy for you to pull things out of the cells, like oxygen, like nutrients, and very easy to put things back into the cells like carbon dioxide and waste, so it goes off. Okay? And they are easily broken. Okay, this is where bruises come from. So you fall down, you get a bruise. I'm sure it's happened to all of us. When you get bruises, you're actually breaking your capillaries, you're breaking your blood vessels. Okay, I'm gonna go back here because we're not ready to talk about blood. I want to talk about one more thing. We're talking about how veins in diagrams are typically blue, arteries are typically red. The reason for this, I already said, one has oxygen, one has carbon dioxide in it. The veins typically have carbon dioxide, not always, okay, but typically veins will have carbon dioxide on them, so they're illustrated as blue, okay, because the blood will actually be a lot darker. It'll be a darker red, and the muscles are a lot thinner, so you show them as blue, whereas the arteries, they are typically illustrated as red because the wall is a lot thicker and they have oxygen-rich blood on it. So if you see blood that has a lot of oxygen, it's usually a lot lighter, a lot brighter. It is not true that our blood is blue until it comes in contact with oxygen. It's just darker. All right, let's keep going. Next, we have our blood. Blood is the second largest example of connective tissue in our body. Okay, it's huge. It's made up of four things. I almost said three. Okay, it's made up of plasma, it's made up of white blood cells and platelets, and it's made up of red blood cells. Okay, plasma. If you watch vampire movies or you read those old vampire comics, I think it's Morbius or something like that. They're always after people's plasma. That's what they're trying to suck. They're sucking the blood, but it's the plasma from the blood that they're sucking. 55% of the blood is plasma, and then we have the red blood cells, we have the white blood cells, and we have the platelets. Going to the plasma and back to the vampire stories, those poor monsters were just thirsty. Okay, it's mostly water. Plasma is primarily water in which the blood cells are suspended in. Okay, then we have our red blood cells. We talked about red blood cells when we talked about cells and adaptations. Red blood cells contain hemoglobin, which binds very easily to oxygen, and that allows the red blood cells to carry that oxygen to all the different parts of the body. That's the main function of the red blood cells. Okay? Oxygen, like we said earlier, is needed to burn food, make energy, do all the things that we need. Once the oxygen gets dropped off, wherever it needs to be dropped off, the carbon dioxide hitches on and goes off to the lungs. Okay? Red blood cells have another very important adaptation, which we may have talked about in one of the other units, and that was that they don't have a nucleus. Okay, so if you remember when we were talking about cells, the nucleus is really important because that's where cell reproduction occurs. It's what makes you, all your DNA, whatnot, is in the nucleus. That was one of the organelles that you can identify on the onion cell lab. However, blood cells do not have a nucleus. Okay, and they have this for two reasons. Number one, it allows them to be very flexible, to go through, to bend and twist in the capillaries. Also, it allows them to make some extra room for that oxygen that they're going to be carrying. So keep that in mind. They don't have a nucleus. You might see that here or there. Next, we have our white blood cells, and we got a pretty picture on the side here of some white blood cells holding, looks like one's holding a sword. I'm not sure what those other two things are, but they're used to fight infection. Okay, and they're actually part of, obviously, our circulatory system, but they're also part of our immune system, one of the other 11 systems in our body. They consume bacteria and viruses and fight off infection. If you guys watch the Magic School Bus on digestion, that was season 1, episode 2. I got bored one day and I watched episode 3, and they actually have white blood cells in it because one of the boys or girls gets sick, so they go into the small school bus and they see some white blood cells going and attacking the viruses. I won't tell you what happens in case you want to watch it. It's on Netflix. Kind of cool. Next, we have our platelets. Our last part are the platelets, and here you see a picture of a red blood cell with all these jaggedy things all around them. Okay, they are jagged-shaped cells that cluster into groups at cuts to create scabs and stop bleeding. Okay, if you did not have these, we would never stop bleeding if we got a little cut. Okay? Some of you may have heard of people that suffer from that have hemophilia or hemophiliacs. These are individuals that don't have enough platelets, so a small minor cut or a minor bruise could cause some serious internal bleeding. That's it. Okay, it was a little bit of a longer lesson, but circulatory system is pretty important. It works with the other systems, especially digestive system and respiratory system, and the next lesson is going to be on the excretory system. There will be a few Bill Nye videos. There's one on blood, one on heart, I believe the heart. I'll be putting links for those, as well as perhaps some other links and whatnot. And there is one activity I was thinking of doing, so stay tuned if the activity gets posted. Take a look at D2L, and we'll go from there. Hope everything's going okay, guys. This is new to me too, so have fun. Have a great day.